you're barraged with this small army of required questions. So confirming personal information, health history. It's really easy to forget that we do all these things when you enter a doctor's office or some sort of mental health clinician's office, because we're just like going through the motions, check yes, check no. These questions are there in virtually every setting in a medical sense in every country for a very good reason, just that they not only enhance the quality and effectiveness of your care, but they protect against unintentional malpractice. You could have so much that you're bringing in, and that's why, health training is one of the most intensive trainings for any profession. It's for that reason. And so when you open Wysa or a similar app, kind of walk right in and then you're talking to your therapist. There's a lot that this therapist doesn't know. There's also a lot that you haven't been pushed to reflect on, or any guidance that you've been able to give and what you don't want, what you don't want. Those small steps, or what feels like small steps, are really, really big. And you'll see through this podcast that I'm not anti-AI therapy, but I'm anti-AI that might claim to be a therapist, or that might claim things which it is allowed to do that it can't actually offer you.
Kate, it's so good to see you. How are you feeling today?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I was just jumping into the first line of your article that we're writing about today.
Oh my goodness. Well, if you really were an AI therapy chatbot, I'd probably have 4 auto-generated responses and I'd click pretty good or happy, depending on what it gives me. I mean, I got 4 to pick from, so.
Okay, welcome. Today, we're going to take a bit of an interesting turn, because usually we talk about like practical AI use cases for businesses, entrepreneurs and stuff. And this is going to be quite refreshing for our audience, because you're a journalist. You've been given a very interesting topic to write about. You've done a deep dive on it. So I was wondering if you could kind of shed some light, firstly, on like your background and then to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, totally. It's really great to be here. So my name is Kate Farmer. I'm a freelance journalist here in the US. I write for an agency called Young Voices. So it's a pretty standard PR agency with the cool twist that it's for slightly younger skewed writers and journalists. So they sponsor and they pitch and they serve as agents for writers on policy, sociology, culture, you name it, but for writers under 35. And so I'm in the category of under 35. I'm in my young 20s, and I've been with Young Voices for over 2 years now, and finishing up my time with Young Voices, and then soon we'll be at a bigger paper that I cannot yet name because the offer is really early. But I have been covering with Young Voices various topics in the sphere of health, social mobility being a really new sort of field in journalism, and it can encompass anywhere from healthcare and mental health to sort of homelessness, public safety, kind of in that bubble. I really like seeing the different topics that pop up there, because that's one of the most unpredictable and fast-moving fields. But one of my pet issues I've had for the past few years has been mental health care, and especially how dramatically mental health care is getting shaken up by AI. And AI is shaking up a little bit of everything, but I started my career in late 2022. So my career is about as old as ChatGPT, for context, and watching how healthcare and mental health has changed over time with AI has produced some of my favorite and most weird and wacky pieces of journalism, because that is AI for you, you guys. And so the piece that we're here to talk about today, it's for Kindwrath Publishing, and I'll try and mention them as much as I can, because this was their idea and this is their cool big plan. So it's KEINRATH publishing.org. So it's because of them that I'm here. But their idea was that, okay, you covered AI therapy and the debut of AI therapy back in mid-2023. So when ChatGPT and LLMs were pretty young in the public eye, they said, why don't you go revisit that now that they're getting widespread use, now that AI, as predicted, is really starting to take over and change a little bit of everything. And so this was a longer form piece, about 10 pages or so, digging into AI therapy, its effects, and also increasingly the weird Wild West of regulation or lack thereof around AI therapy, and kind of how that's shaking up the healthcare field, the world of mental health, and then increasingly this extra interesting world of data privacy, data collection. So there's a lot in there. It probably could have been 3 times longer, but I wanted to spare the kind people at Kindwrath from my blabber. But really kind of interesting area in which a field that in the past was not conceivably ever something that could be done by computers or robots or AI, that now all of a sudden is starting to grapple with what that might actually look like. So that's a bit of a glaze on who I am and what I'm writing on and the nerdy things I'm thinking about right now in 2025.
Awesome. I love it. There's so many different things to cover today, that kind of balance between the mental health crisis and cost effectiveness, regulations, ethics, data privacy. I'm hoping we get to cover more in CBT as well today, because it's just something I'm personally interested in. But I want to bring things back to like your kind of first experiences of what you actually went over here. So we're talking about a mental health app called Wysa. I was wondering if you'd tell me, like, what were your first experiences with it, your emotions when using it? Like, take me through that.
Yeah, and so kind of like we showed in the beginning, using an AI therapy app. Well, to use an AI therapy app is kind of like saying using an AI model. I mean, it's such a broad experience nowadays, but generally the big few AI apps out there that you're most likely to pick up if you're looking for an AI therapist or an AI mental health companion or whatever they call themselves. Wysa is the number one player out there, but its competitors are Woebot, Uber, and so on. And then increasingly, whatever people find on ChatGPT. But if you go to a dedicated AI therapy app, you're most likely to open the app and then kind of walk right in, which is something to talk about a little bit too. Wysa at the very least, and when I talk, I'm probably going to talk most about Wysa because it's the most used, it's the biggest out there. It's got over 20,000 positive reviews on the App Store. But you're going to walk into Wysa, it'll ask you a few questions, but they're pretty broad and they're going to give you basically a range of things to select from. Like, what are you struggling with today? Maybe it's depression, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's, another sort of basket of mental health concern you might have. And then you just kind of stride right in. And then it says, hello, how are you feeling today? So you really cut right to the chase, and it's anytime, anywhere. And Wysa, a common theme with Wysa that I notice in a lot of these AI apps that's kind of independent of their regulatory big questions, they're a little bit dorky. And so when I opened Wysa, it does this thing that started to infuriate me as a journalist who had to use it every day for reporting. But it gives you this big emoji and it says, all right, here's the smile. And you can move it up or down depending on how you're feeling. And I was like, okay, I'm not that young. Like I can use words, but I contort the smiley to medium smiley. Okay, I'm feeling pretty average today. And then it says, most days we're somewhere in the middle of our emotional range, just a comment reflecting the emoji I've just put in. And then it gives me an option to respond. And oftentimes, again, it's a select from a menu sort of thing. So a lot of times the user's like, okay, where am I going with this? What Wysa is doing there is it's giving you a set of pre-designed prompts, and it can have a confidence interval in what you're saying about how positive or negative is this? How is this relating to their mental state? Is this sort of indicating depression? Is this indicating sort of reflection on what I just said? It does its best to kind of gauge the response you've typed in or the preset response you've given, and then produces a prompt that to it is the best estimate of how to respond. And you kind of proceed from there. So it'll ask you about your mood. I'll tell it my mood, and it'll give me comments on my mood, and it'll ask me to reflect on a time in the past I might have felt this way before. It's a really common one. It's going to try and encourage me to reflect, and then it's going to gauge my response using NLP really broadly, and then fire me back another question and try to get me to reflect. One thing it's going to do a lot, though, is dodge, because at the end of the day, and this is what a lot of users don't expect in 2025 when they pick up an AI app, which is that it's not going to be the type of LLM you expect. It's not going to chat GPT you. It's going to give you the best preset response it has based on what it thinks you're probably saying. So it's just going to use NLP and guess. So it's going to be a lot of you explaining something and it responding kind of accordingly. Sometimes it's a little off topic. I mean, you see in the article, if I try to really cut through and ask it, why are you talking like a human? You're not a human. Or can you give me advice on this thing, this specific thing that happened to me today? It'll be like, interesting. Tell me more. Like, well, I don't want to tell you more. You tell me something. So it's a bit of a push and pull experience to use these apps, but we can get into what people like about them. But your first experience, if you listen to this podcast, you're like, I'm sold. I want to pick up Wysa. I want to try it. Be prepared to explain yourself a lot and talk about your mood.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of overwhelming sense I got from reading your article, as well as that it's really not so great at taking in context, and it has to like very carefully stay within certain guardrails. So if you come out and you're talking about, oh, I saw an elephant today and it had 3 legs, then it's just not going to understand what you're talking about because it doesn't have that context. And something you kind of touched on initially there is like the fact that you can just stroll into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could just stroll into downloading the app and using it. And something you kind of mentioned in the article is that the app, in comparison to a therapist, doesn't have any context, right? You don't have to go into an office. You don't have to shake someone's hand. They don't learn about what background you're from, really what age you are, what country you're from. They don't have any pre-screening questions and stuff. Like, how important is that in the process of therapy? Like, is that why you felt it was lacking so much personalization?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to pull at there. One of the most striking things of using an AI therapist, and we can get into like, what is a therapist and is this really offering therapy? Is it marketing what it says it's marketing? But one of the main things you'll notice if you're someone with experience in therapy or mental health care, or just someone who is aware of the struggle with which you enter any doctor's office, physical, mental health, whatever it may be, you're barraged with this small army of required questions. So confirming personal information, health history, screening for symptoms and risk factors, medication, lifestyle habits, family medical history. It's really easy to forget that we do all these things when you enter a doctor's office or some sort of mental health clinician's office, because we're just like going through the motions, check yes, check no, whipping through documents, kind of seeing it as this preliminary must do before I get to the real work. But these questions are there in virtually every setting in a medical sense in every country for a very good reason, which is that they not only enhance the quality and effectiveness of your care, but they protect against unintentional malpractice, and that the diagnoses that you're receiving or the treatments that are being suggested to you accurately reflect the condition that you as a client have or the experiences you're having. It also helps, the provider. Here, the provider is a very broad sense. It's now an AI. But that ethical standards of care are upheld, and that prescribed treatments or medications don't pose specific harmful risks for the client. Even something more minor in therapy about there might be a really sensitive area in the past that needs to be touched with delicacy, or you might be on a medication that affects your mood really wildly at different periods of the day, or you could have so much that you're bringing in. And that's why, health training is one of the most intensive trainings for any profession. It's for that reason. And so when you open Wysa or a similar app like Uper and you just kind of walk right in and then you're talking to your therapist, there's a lot that this therapist doesn't know. There's also a lot that you haven't been pushed to reflect on, or any guidance that you've been able to give and what you don't want, kind of just walk right in. So in terms of quality of care and the experience you're getting, those small steps, or what feels like small steps, are really, really big. They also, going farther down the line, constitute this interesting class of health information that gets us into the data privacy side of things. But right now we're just thinking about, is this even going to work in the first place? But one of the striking things in the beginning, the emojis, the emotion, the whole, pre-selected responses, it's all a little weird, but the fact that you stroll right in and start should be at least a warning sign to a user, or at the very least an indicator of what this product is, because, oftentimes the effectiveness of the product depends on what you're actually asking of it and expecting of it. And you'll see through this podcast that I'm not anti-AI therapy, but I'm anti-AI that might claim to be a therapist, or that might claim things which it is allowed to do that it can't actually offer you.
If we were to take things from another perspective, why do you think it received so many good reviews? Like in your kind of research, what were the positive experiences that people had with it?
So it's really interesting. I mean, App Store reviews in general can skew a little bit weirdly, but I'm looking at the Apple App Store on reviews like Wysa or reviews like Uper or Woebot. They're pretty overwhelmingly positive, but looking at the 1-star reviews, you can kind of see what the users are and aren't liking. But the positive reviews are helpful in seeing that it really depends on the task you're asking of from these AI systems. And I think that that's a general premise you can have about AI across the board, no matter what you're using it for, and that your satisfaction with the AI you're interacting with really is predicated on the use you're asking of it and whether it's a good fit for that use. And that's true of anything. And these AI therapy chatbots are especially a case of that. At their worst, they can come across as a substitution for human therapy or a place to which you can offer up a lot of your private health information or give it a lot of very sensitive information about yourself and expect it to help you work through serious conditions. If you're looking for that and you come in and then you get this, you will be surprised. You'll be disappointed. And I came in with that expectation because I've been covering AI therapy. And as a journalist covering AI therapy, I'm expecting a therapist. But if you're someone who's coming from a little bit of a different perspective and a different use, you might have a pretty good experience. And so Wysa, for example, some of the positive reviews emphasize the things that Wysa can do that a human healthcare system just can't. Woebot, for example, a really big player in this field, Woebot reports that 80% of the use of Woebot comes between the hours of, I think, 5 p.m. and 8 a.m., somewhere around there. So off work hours when someone just needs someone to lean on or needs something through which they can vent their feelings. That's a guided, controlled process. Some people report that Wysa is a great stopgap between care if they lose insurance coverage, which is a real serious concern. People report that they start Wysa because, really relevant to the UK here, the NHS recommended Wysa to be used during your waiting periods. The average waiting period for care for adolescents in the UK is over 100 days, especially for someone who's a Gen Z or millennial who's really adept with technology, who doesn't have as much fear of AI as an older generation might, or this sort of hesitation. This can be the thing you pick up that just guides you through reflecting and also walks you through learning at a rudimentary level, cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, which is an interesting driver behind these apps because almost all these apps use that particular technique. And so many of the positive reviews will talk about how these apps came through for them at a time when the system couldn't. But it really depends on what they're expecting from this system and the kind of use they're using it for. And so some of the best examples are people who just need to be guided through their own thoughts or who are able to learn and exercise CBT or find reflection or meditation guided by an app to be helpful. The one-star reviews sound like me. They say, why are you asking me to contort this emoji to match my mood? I'm 40. Or why is this not listening to what I'm saying? I just brought up my dog's sick and it said, okay, what did it say to you yesterday? People who complain about the sort of stupid feeling of these AI apps and the specific type of NLP that they are, which is a rule-based NLP. So very varying opinions, but again, it is a little bit of a setting expectations question.
I can't remember what the exact quote is, but it's something about like the difference between your expectations and reality is that's where your happiness lies, right? Is like if you're expecting this to be full-fledged therapy and it's not matching that, obviously you're not going to be satisfied with it, but it might just be needing a kind of rebranding or repackaging that it's not AI therapy, but it's like something that can assist you in conversating with yourself and exploring these mental health topics. I wouldn't know exactly how to describe that on a marketing level, but it sounds like there's some sort of use for it here, but to replace an AI therapist just it's not possible right now.
And there's a good example, I think, of the app that's doing it best. And there's a lot of different reasons why, but Woebot, I think, is a good example. I listened to a podcast recently with Allison Darcy, who's the founder of Woebot. So Woebot is another one of these AI therapy apps, but Woebot positions itself in a way that I think is really smart, in a way that I also think is very honest. Woebot, in the title with the word bot, they really lean into AI as an AI. And so Woebot is programmed very carefully to not pretend to be human, which was a major critique I had of Wysa. Wysa kept saying, blank has worked for me in the past, or I try this. How about you try this with me? It's weird and also a little odd when Wysa just sends you clips from like children's movies to make you feel better. It's just some odd programming in general, but especially the sort of pretending to be a human function. For me personally, I don't like coming to someone with my human experiences and pains and having an AI saying, oh yeah, this is what I do when I have that experience, or this is what I do when I recommend this when I'm stressed. Woebot does a good job of programming itself as an AI that is an AI to help a human. And even more so, it does its job better because it's an AI and not a human. And it's sort of outside of this human realm as sort of an advisor. And so its objective focus is also more on wellness instead of just attention, because a downside of these apps is, like any app in your phone, it wants to captivate your attention. It wants to keep you on longer. Woebot is designed to sort of keep you on the app for a normal period of time, to not have you on there constantly, and to also be programmed to sort of guide you towards reflection that then you take off the app. So when Alison Darcy was talking about Woebot a little bit too, she also helpfully explained how these apps are programmed and why Woebot kind of stays within its bounds better than some other apps. But Woebot and Wysa in general, what these apps are is natural language processing, yes, but they're not necessarily LLMs, which is interesting because in the world of pretty advanced sounding ChatGPT, you would assume that the AI therapist is talking to you and responding predictively based on what you've just said. But it's actually a rule-based NLP. And so Woebot is very open about this too. But there's a lot of risk in having a bot that just goes off and talks to you with an LLM style predictive text, with the fine tuning that an LLM has. Rather, what they have is natural language processing with specific rules encoded and written by therapists or workers at these apps. Sometimes they say they're written by therapists. Sometimes they don't say who's writing these responses. So I think a smart AI therapy app right now will be a rules-based AI therapy app, so it can't just go off the rails and start self-diagnosing you. Alison Darcy actually commented on a trial that Woebot did with an LLM model. And she said their problem was that the LLM kept trying to diagnose the patient and tell it you have X and go do Y. And it got a little bit too creative and a little bit too, off the rails. I do this. I think you have this. And so Wysa does that too. But, there's limits to having a rule-based AI system that sometimes can come across as too dumb. But in general, I think that a well-structured, rule-based natural language processing system that is designed to work in combination with a healthcare plan and that is not pretending to be a human, but rather a bot that responds and guides you through something, I think is an example of a good start. But obviously there's a lot to dig into there, and not every app does what it says. Newsflash.
I'd love if we could jump and double click more into the need for this in the first place. You kind of touch on it in the article. You highlight this figure that the UK saw 40% more patients from mental health, over 1 million person increase from the previous year in 2023, 2024. Could you kind of tell us more about that? Like, I don't know if you have some kind of larger understanding as well of like why this is occurring.
UK, US, there's data across a lot of these Western countries. Western countries tend to have the best tracked data on this, and they're also more culturally and socially similar. So I'm talking Western here, but this is something that's reverberating across the world. And I think time will tell just how similar we are to some of these other countries that collect data very differently. But you're right to point to the background concerns here, because that's really what's driving this user base and driving what is especially young users to such an odd solution. I mean, especially for older listeners right now, this is a really odd phenomenon, and it's coming up relatively quick. Even in the age of quick AI everything, it's weird. But the NHS records that, NHS and the US are very similar in their data that they're finding. In 2023, the NHS recorded that about 1 in 5 children and teenagers, so adolescents more broadly, had some probable mental disorder or the symptoms of disordered behavior, which is not something you're necessarily born with, but something that socially comes along in pretty poor conditions for mental health. So as of March of this year, over 250,000 youth are awaiting mental health support in the UK. And UK's NHS system, as many of you know, is really overwhelmed in pretty much every sector, but mental health is one of its worst. Of the around 300,000 adolescents, children, youth who received mental health services last year, the average wait time was 108 days. Some even waited over 2 years. And in the US, it's not much better. The US and Canada wait times are more in the weeks to months range, which I suppose is a bit better, but they have to navigate the really difficult and dicey insurance situation. And so in the US, I think there's around 57% or something as of 2021 of teenage girls especially were having persistent sadness or hopelessness. So that's a 60% increase. And for men, the trend is not quite as sharp, but it's starting to catch up to women. And these trends are kind of reflected across a lot of age groups under 50 or 60, but especially younger generations, the kind that are picking up AI tools, opening their mind to some solutions that seem a little bit weird and a bit of a head scratcher to older adults. And so we have this background swirling of mental health desperation and overwhelmed systems. And that's when people start looking to solutions like AI therapy. And I think increasingly, I've read a lot on the major commentators on mental health in the US and the UK. And my favorite by far is Jonathan Haidt, who just released a new book called The Anxious Generation. And he basically picks up what Jean Twenge, who is this early major scholar on youth mental health and generational mental health more generally. But Jean Twenge has this thing called the tech thesis that many of us refer to in the field, essentially that changes in technology are what most changes and affects mental health and lived experiences. And so with the debut of social media and like widespread internet access, she points to that as really where everything started to go downhill. And the stats of mental health around 2013 through 2015, they just plummet for every age group, but especially every age group under, boomers and up. That data is a little bit more varied, but for younger generations, it's just plummeting. And it's directly correlated also with screen time usage. And one could fill books, and many have filled books of screen time usage and what it does for your mental health of younger generations that are online almost constantly, which is almost half of US adolescents, according to Pew Research Center, say they're online almost constantly. Their mental health outcomes are very, very poor. And so these are the groups of people who are overwhelmingly most likely to pick up something like an AI therapy app, which helps us understand better why this is moving so quickly. But it also at the same time gives us interesting context into, okay, how are these people actually using these apps? What are they coming to these apps for? And what are the stakes here? Because again, it's sort of a use question and a matching question, in that how you evaluate an AI really matters on what you're using it for, what you're expecting of it, and who's coming to it at the end of the day. And so when we see large quantities of younger adults coming onto these apps after work hours at night in long waiting periods for mental health with very strong indicators of depression, of anxiety, that's our user pool for this AI, which is very different than the user pool for DeepSeek or for ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using nowadays, which creates a lot of interesting factors of how we evaluate the AI and what we do about it and how we think about these systems. So it's a bit of background for you.
With that, you're kind of just touching on another interesting part that you mentioned in the article is like, how do we validate that like these are ready to actually act as therapists? So you talk about the kind of lax regulations and the ethics, the idea of a general wellness product and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are the regulations around this? How do people get around it? Like, what do I have to go through to be put in the App Store as an AI therapist?
Yeah. And so this is sort of this is really where things start to get real in the piece, is looking at AI therapy and kind of figuring out what is it in a regulatory sense. And interestingly, AI therapy apps are not, their roots are in healthcare devices. They're a healthcare device very broadly. And so that means here in the US and similarly in the UK and in Europe, they fall under what in the US is called the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. But they're a health product super broadly. So we're looking at this as something that we use for our health. And in the US, there's been a really big regulatory problem here, as is almost any other modern country, which is that with the rise of just the internet, and then especially with the rise of the App Store having now thousands, millions of apps, and then boom, the AI revolution in late 2022, there are millions of things out there that deal with health and wellness that are devices or products in some capacity. And that's completely overwhelming to regulatory organizations like the FDA, and for the UK equivalent, Canadian equivalent, what have you. And so in 2016, the US looked around and said, we cannot regulate pre-market every health-related product out there. It's way too much. And so what we need is a new way of classifying what's actually important for us to examine, for us to approve before it hits markets. and what can we kind of let off on a looser standard because we just don't have the bandwidth to regulate all this and it's pretty low risk anyway. And so that's how the category GWP, general wellness product, was born in the US. And so the FDA and similar regulatory agencies abroad oversee food products, health products, what have you. But general wellness products are the interesting category of things that make just general claims about health, or products that make references to diseases or conditions, but they're not invasive. Like they're not some sort of catheter, they're not a heart rate monitor, they're not something invasive into your body. So in the relative world of health and wellness related products, these are on the relatively minor end of that spectrum. And so to make their workload easier, in 2016, they made this category called the GWP. And so in order to fall into the category of the GWP world, you would just have to make your claims about health really broad. And so you can't say that this mental health product or this physical health product cures depression or cures anxiety. But what you can say is that this product enhances depression treatment, or this product assists users in dealing with depression, or this promotes relaxation and manages stress in support of anxiety treatment, or this may help reduce the risk of, suicide, depression, what have you. And as a writer, it makes me laugh, sort of the claims that we've gotten really used to and the general wellness product explosion. GWPs are everywhere. They're all around you. And you see this all the time on commercials, on ads, saying that this supports recovery from eating disorders. This promotes a healthy lifestyle, or this helps reduce depression. Instead of this reduces depression, this helps reduce depression. And so smart marketing allows a product to stay within the GWP category and avoid having to go through the FDA or a similar regulatory organization for market approval. So what happens when you're in the GWP category? A product can just go. It can release itself in the market. It doesn't have to do pre-trial testing. It can just tailor its claims to make sure that they're not actually saying that this will heal your depression, this will treat your depression or your PTSD or your eating disorder or manage your weight. They'll just promote these things, or whatever linguistic, jungle gym you can make of it. And then you can push it out into the market. But this is produced, and I talk about this in my Kindwrath article, but this produced this interesting concept called line skating that some scholars of the field have started to call it, in that you claim up to the maximum you can before you exit the category of general wellness product and release a lot of different products or apps on the market. And the apps that do well, that have a positive response from their user base, you're like, okay, these are the ones I want to consider investing in for my business. And these are the ones I'm actually going to go run trials on. I'm actually going to go seek FDA approval and then invest in the process of getting it FDA approved. And so the FDA approval acts more of a stamp of approval from the FDA, which can help a product, increase its marketing abilities. It can help increase its credibility. But there's this misconception that you need FDA approval to work in the health sphere or the wellness sphere, but you don't. And increasingly, producers of these products are noticing that why go through the long waiting process, the expensive trials, the vetting, when I can just release 4 different products, skate the line, make some money, see what works, and then I'll invest in, making it safe. And this isn't a bad thing on the surface necessarily. I mean, there are a lot of products that literally just promote wellness, like a meditation app. Crappy meditations, it sucks, but it's not going to really do a whole lot for your mental health. But we're thinking about the user base that's coming onto these apps. I mean, we've just talked about the mental health crisis and sort of the desperation of younger users and their open-mindedness to these AI apps that are increasingly getting more advanced and also getting deeper into your private health information. This app isn't required to give you anything or prove anything. It can just make these claims without having to prove them to the FDA or to anybody, and you kind of become its human test subject, which is a scary way of putting it, but in some cases it's true. I mean, a therapy app is putting a vulnerable person in front of this AI provider of sorts. No questions at the start to protect against malpractice. It's not allowed to diagnose you, but it's certainly treating you like a therapist would. And because they're skating the line in this general wellness product category, it can kind of claim and do what it wants. And so That's kind of the sphere we're looking at right now. I mean, Wysa is an example of one of those. And only 6 apps as of when I wrote this piece in December had gotten FDA approval, and none of them are the big ones I've mentioned. So it's something to think about. Again, we keep coming back to the main thesis here, just that how we evaluate AI comes back to the uses we're asking of it. I don't really care a whole lot if I'm just chatting with it and trying to learn wellness and, I'm trying to learn meditation. But if I'm coming in with some serious background conditions and this app has claims that are unproven, it's not regulated, it's positioning itself as this big, therapist provider, it's when we get into some dicey territory.
Where does that leave us? Like, what is the discussion in public policy right now in the US? Is there much going on with this? Are you kind of on the cutting edge here with a few other people, a few other journalists that are exploring this and really bringing light to what is a very serious issue being so lax with people's mental health?
The FDA, the specific general wellness product category, I mean, the FDA is a nebulous, confusing organization because of its breadth. I mean, food and drug covers everything. I mean, an example of a similar general wellness product is like gloves, like plastic gloves. And that's anywhere from plastic gloves to a therapy app. I mean, even a scented candle that has some health thing related to it. I mean, we're looking at everything under the sun here. There's millions of things that can be a general wellness product, and then millions more that can fall into some sort of class 1 through class 3 FDA device. It's huge. It's dizzying. And I mean, you run a podcast on AI, which is equally dizzying when you think of the scope and all of the potential conclusions and results and impacts of AI. It's equally broad. And so what journalists are increasingly worrying about, though, in the healthcare sphere is the data side of things, both what these apps stand to leak or the danger to users that can potentially come out of them, but also just the holes in user expectations when using them is increasingly an area of notice. And so in the health sphere and in the healthcare world, and this is physical healthcare or mental health care, in the US, we have the law called HIPAA. And in the UK, there's similar privacy laws. Pretty much everywhere there's health privacy laws because health data is some of the most sensitive and important data out there about yourself, something that's not talked about enough outside of the healthcare world. So there's a lot of worry here about the potential of these apps to access your health data or formulate health data on you and then either use it or sell it for nefarious means. And oftentimes the actual app's designers are coming in relatively innocently. I mean, I can't speak for the thousands of apps out there, but a lot of these apps, we're talking general wellness products. They might release a lot of different apps onto the market to figure out what works, what doesn't. Some of these apps will get successful, some won't. But many times in the general wellness product world, you'll launch an app, it's pretty successful, then you sell it to another company that wants to do the major FDA approval step. And so you might only hold on to that particular app or product for a certain period of time, then you make your money by selling it off to someone else who wants to pick up that investment. But the health data that's stored in that app, or just the data about you, your location data, the times that you talk about your depression, maybe you log in every night at 7 p.m. and talk about your depression to an AI. The app that purchases that now has access to all that data, and it can do whatever it wants. And data regulation laws have no say, no impact on what the buyer might want to do with it. And so you can find an app you trust with a developer you trust, but they're completely unregulated in what they want to do with what they gather about you if they sell or if their data is hacked. And so a real worry here is, what is being deduced about users through these apps and where is it going to go? I mean, it's one thing if the app you're using turns out to be scammy and sells your location data, sells your protected health information, but it's another thing if just it gets bought and the next company doesn't have the same ethics as the original site that you had. And this is a bigger deal than people sometimes realize. I mean, oftentimes you have this sort of expectation of privacy and care. You go onto something that calls itself a therapist, like HIPAA protections, all of these pre-screening. So the expectation of care is concerning enough because it's kind of a terms and conditions problem, right? Like you don't really read all this text they throw at you when you sign on to something, if they even give you terms and conditions at all for some of these apps, which is give or take. But you get into a really concerning world of the data they collect, even if it seems pretty minor, is more than you think. I mean, BetterHelp is one of the big players in this field, but it was recently released in a big report with the ACLU and another organization that BetterHelp collects data as small as, the times of day you use the app, the specific things you're talking about. It collects all these little pieces that it forms to make this really comprehensive puzzle that not only can infer a lot about someone's health history, but is really lucrative to advertisers of all sorts who can save a lot of money by knowing the exact times and locations that you have a mental health crisis. So target someone with Instagram ads at 10 p.m. when they're at home in their bed. It has that data. That's a really, really lucrative buy. Instead of, marketing a PTSD product to everyone on Instagram you can access, market a PTSD product to the person at 10 p.m. in their bed, because that's when they always seem to need help with PTSD. And so really targeted, potentially nefarious advertising is a worry. And even if it's a well-intentioned product, the fact that it can purchase that data about you and know that about you and then market you something at a time when you're really vulnerable is really concerning to ethicists and to really anyone who's thinking deeply about this and who's worried. But then in a data leak sense too, private health information is one of the most valuable things about yourself. And we don't think a whole lot about what one can do with it. But people can steal and sell your health data for financial fraud or identity theft. Medical identity theft is so much more valuable than stealing something like a credit card, because although credit cards and credit data can get changed and reopened and closed, your medical file is deep and comprehensive. It has a history of conditions, medications, treatments, and it's really hard to change your own medical data. And so someone can open lines of credit or file false tax returns. They can fraudulently bill insurance companies for fake medical procedures that are thousands of dollars. Even what they can do is impersonate healthcare providers or insurance representatives with very, very convincing, very specific details of procedures you've had, medications you've had, visits you've had, and bill you for thousands of dollars. And it's really hard to tell what's true, what's not true. I mean, a single medical record in the US can sell for over $250, even more depending on how comprehensive it is. And it's really hard to change that or kind of put that bull back in its cage once it's out. And at least here in the US and similarly in the UK, there's no regulations right now on health data stored on mobile devices. There's protections for dedicated apps for your healthcare provider, your insurer, or a data clearinghouse. And a data clearinghouse is basically a company that is tasked with protecting the transfer of your medical data. There's a reason there's a company for that, because otherwise it isn't particularly protected. And on mobile devices, it's not. And so I'm painting a broad picture here, but this is pretty sensitive stuff. Maybe what you tell Wysa isn't that deep. Maybe what you tell BetterHelp is, but it's better protected. It's really a give and take. But in general, these apps can learn a lot about you, and whether they protect that data well from a cell or from themselves is really up to their word.
Where does that leave us, right? Because there's obviously a certain cohort of people that can't wait 4 months for therapy. There's people that can't have insurance. Like, maybe it's their only option, but we're well aware that like all of this medical data can be sold. Like, you're kind of stuck in the middle of two not so great options. So like, what's the pathway forward, I guess?
I mentioned earlier that I covered this topic back in mid-2023, and one of my interviewers back then asked me, he said, okay, well, what's the verdict? Should I use it or should I not use it? And I think my answer back then was an empathetic no. I think nowadays I've shifted it slightly to an empathetic maybe, perhaps. But I think back to the central thing, it depends on where you land, as in which app you're choosing, and then what purpose you want out of it. I mean, I, as a journalist, I use these apps for an extended period of time to write this article and understand them better. I'm not worried. The stuff I was talking to these apps is pretty minor. And what it was walking me through is pretty standard cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, which I can get into in a second, but they've been around for decades, and they have one of the best track records in mental health of helping people work through their problems and reframe their doubts and reframe their sort of cognitive distortions, is what they call it. I'll never amount to anything. This always happens to me. everyone feels this way about me. The distorted thoughts that creep in and influence your mood and your behavior and that contribute to depression and anxiety. Apps can be a really good way to guide you through the self-guided cognitive behavioral therapy techniques of examining your own thoughts, working through what's true and what's not true, helping you develop a coping mechanism. There is so much agency that we have, especially in like a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy kind of approach, and an app that guides you through working through your mental health problems on your own is really good. That's a positive. And I think if you do your research on an app that, like Woebot, for example, I think Woebot is a good option, but finding an app that has good data protection, there's the Mozilla Foundation does privacy reviews of different apps, but finding one that is good on privacy, making sure to have boundaries with the AI, and knowing what you're getting into going in. So not expecting it to fix the problems in your life, in your relationship, in your family, but using it to try and be a self-help tool in the way that many meditate with a pretty simple app is a good thing. And I think that I know that there are a lot of really great developers out there who want to use AI tools to help people help themselves with mental health. And a lot of these apps do that. But you got to have boundaries with it, just as it has boundaries with you. And the fact that they're rule-based natural language processing means that most of these major apps are not going to just talk about everything you want to talk about. They've got some guardrails on them. You should have guardrails with them too. And keep in the back of your mind that, would I be comfortable with this information being shared with another app or being sold, or ads potentially accessing this? How much am I giving this? What is it asking for my location? Just being a smart consumer of AI and thinking through what you're going through, in a sense. This is true of a lot of AI, but especially here. And I think a lot of my worry is, the lack of regulation and the structure of these apps, but the user pool coming in. I more worry about, where is the user going to be at when they pick up this app? Because when I picked it up as a journalist looking into it, I'm fine. I'm comfortable with it. Did my research. I'm also not telling it anything crazy, but it's 8 p.m. and you're really struggling. You need something right now. You don't have another human to lean on. I'm concerned about what the content of that worry or those thoughts are, and then what the app's going to do with it.
Yeah. It's hard to process everything. Whilst I'm still in the process of processing, I was wondering if you could explain to me more about CBT, both just as like an original concept, and then how it's being used in conjunction with AI.
And this can help me be a bit more of an upper on AI therapy apps, because I feel like the negatives have come up pretty strong. But I do want to see where these apps go, and I have some optimism about what they can help people do in a world where, like, we cannot fix these healthcare systems overnight. And I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we have enough capacity to treat all the people who need to be treated in due time. And so this is the future. I'm excited to follow the future. Part of building a good future is pointing out skepticism where it ought to be. But cognitive behavioral therapy, the spread of CBT through these apps is a positive. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a long history. I mentioned earlier that it's one of the most evidence-based, proven techniques in mental health. I've used it. It's fantastic. I think on the sort of premises of cognitive behavioral therapy throughout my life. And I recommend it to anybody who wants to just become a better manager of themselves and their emotions. The most popular self-help mental health book out there is called Feeling Good by David Burns. And it teaches the reader how to do CBT on their own life, walks them through cognitive distortions they might have, the worries that run away from you, the anxieties that consume you, or the thoughts you have about, that I'll never amount to anything sort of thoughts, or I always fail at this, or no one wants me. Just the common things that a distressed person tends to seem to say. Walks you through how to recognize these cognitive distortions, how to classify them, how to respond to them, and over time rewire how you think about them. And so Feeling Good came out in 1980. It's since sold over 8 million copies. And even still today, when you read charts of the most recommended books or the most referred books by mental health care providers, even physical doctors, Feeling Good is always at the top. This book, I've bought it. I've read a bit of it. It's really wonderful. But the core premise in Feeling Good is that this book can help you get you there. You don't have to wait weeks or months for a therapist to learn some of these potentially life-saving tools right now. Jonathan Haidt, who I mentioned earlier, the author of he wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, his most recent book, The Anxious Generation, that I was just talking about earlier. He credits CBT, largely self-learned CBT, with saving his life. And even then, he brings up cognitive behavioral therapy techniques in a lot of his books, not just about mental health, but also about wrong ways of thinking in parenting or wrong ways of thinking in schools, bringing back to the cognitive distortions that we so easily talk ourselves through. So CBT is nothing short of ground shaking in mental health. And there's a reason it's been a staple of providers for decades. And if you're a listener who's been through therapy, you might recognize kind of what I'm talking about. You might recognize your therapist doing this technique, and it's probably because they were walking you through CBT. And the homework they might give you to go reflect on this, to go think about how you respond and then reframe it this way, that's them guiding you through CBT. And so these apps overwhelmingly are trying to walk you through CBT. So again, an expectations thing. Someone coming into this app who wants to learn, or these apps who want to learn how to better regulate their emotions and how to use AI to sort of keep their mental health in check in the way that you do with your physical health, and learn how to respond to it better, make problems not expand out so greatly whenever they occur, would benefit a lot from having AI walk you through CBT in the same way that sometimes having an AI summarize a book is a little bit easier for people than reading a book. So this is a new model that breaks down CBT in an accessible way for someone in a vulnerable moment who might not pick up a book on it. And it also allows the unique form of AI therapy to kind of give you a more personal lesson and a personal walkthrough than reading a physical text. And so teaching natural language processing models are a great fit for CBT. I mean, they listen to your input, they respond empathetically, and then they push you to reflect on that thought. They categorize that thought. They present it back to you in a neutral way. We have systems that are really, really good at that. And so this is when I get into the sort of self-contradictory mode where I say, man, I'd almost recommend you try doing some kind of AI therapy to walk through CBT. So it's this push and pull here. I mean, if I were the AI god and I could do anything, I would design an AI therapy app that was a really strong rules-based NLP app that had good data protections, that had good boundaries with its user, that used AI as AI and not as a human, and taught people CBT. I think we'd be in a better world. But, there's a lot of expectations and sort of prerequisites here.
I want to take things personal just to finish off. Obviously, you spent a lot of time writing about these types of topics. You've done a deep dive into this. Where do you go from here as an individual? Are you interested in exploring this topic in more detail with different things? Are you going to apply Wysa in your personal life and speak to it? How does Kate Farmer as an individual go from here?
That's an interesting thought. I mean, I think what I, as a journalist, my answer would be to have sort of the neutral gaze towards this technology. I mean, I think you would probably agree to, as someone who works with AI as a job, I mean, AI moves so fast. And then a lot of what we expect out of AI affects what we're likely to recommend you using AI for. And I think I, as a journalist, would say that I personally don't need AI therapy apps right now. And I give them sort of a hesitant endorsement. Maybe my thesis is more just to encourage some light skepticism, but also maybe a little bit of intrigue. So I think me going forward, I think they're more of an interesting policy puzzle right now. And I think that's a neutral way to describe it. But I wouldn't be surprised, I'll probably pick up this issue again a year from now, revisit it, flip it on its end, see what's happened. But, if we get some data privacy protection laws in place, if we get some apps rise to the top of the market that I think do a good job, it might be the time where I start saying, all right, healthcare systems are overwhelmed. We're working on fixing our systems. This is an emotional regulation tool that you can use. This is something that you should watch. Or conversely, I might look back on this and say, early data is showing that these don't actually help you that much, or this is actually fostering a dependency on something that shouldn't have a dependency fostered upon it, which is a bit of a consideration in my Kindwrath piece too. So it really depends. I mean, with AI and with tech especially, the gold is really the data. And so we have user feedback and reviews saying that this helps me. This holds over the tides while I wait for a provider. This walked me through CBT. I'm inclined to believe them and say that this is working for some people, but we don't know where we're going to go with this. I mean, back when the rise of the World Wide Web and the rise of social media, we thought that social media was going to aid connection. And interestingly and ironically, it's actually made us all a lot more distant. And so I think, and I'm inclined to say that a well-designed AI therapy CBT forward app will help us with loneliness and will help us with our mental health. But who knows a couple years down the road what this is going to do. I mean, tech especially is known to have weird flip-flops like this. And so I'm reticent to give a strong prediction about my own life or anyone else's life with it. Perhaps what you can leave from this is to say that that's interesting and maybe parts of this are for me. But it's something to follow, and also an example of how no matter what field of work you work in right now, even if it seems like the last thing that AI is going to want to pop up and insert itself into, you might be surprised. And so I am someone who's worked in mental health for a little bit and covered it for a while. I was surprised. So that's my big gloss.
Awesome, Kate. I firstly want to thank you for your time and coming on and talking about all this today. I had a great time actually reading your article, learned a lot, and have learned a lot by subsequently talking with you today. So firstly, thank you for that. And then secondly, if people want to go ahead and one, read the article for themselves, and two, kind of get in touch with you or kind of learn more about what you're doing, how do they go about doing that?
Kindwrath, again, is my wonderful sponsor for all of this. So please check them out at kindwrathpublishing.org. That's KEINRATH publishing.org. My article's up at the top. It's got a little robot on it. I'm very on theme. And you can read it there. And my name is Kate Farmer, Kate with a K, exactly how it sounds, really simple. But usually my writing's on LinkedIn, but I'm in the process of signing on to an American newspaper here that I'm not allowed to disclose yet, but you'll catch me there soon. And maybe you'll see this pop up again. So I'm grateful to whoever reads it and checks me out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to following this as it grows. It's definitely not over yet.
Awesome, Kate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Liam.